The scene opens inside this fat prison, in the warden's office wing, where the daily workout session was underway. The air carried the familiar scent of iron and sweat, and the rhythmic sounds of bodies striking training equipment echoed through the hall. It was the final evening before Jaehyun's release. While the others treated it as another routine day behind bars, he carried a different weight in his silence. By the next night, he intended to take a life. Every preparation had been carefully arranged, every detail meticulously planned. There was nothing left to chance. After completing the training session, a young woman approached him. She clung to his arm with a mixture of admiration and longing, and confessed that she liked him because of his unwavering attitude, the way he carried himself with quiet authority and composure. Jaehyun responded without warmth, telling her that what she admired was not him, but the weapon he wielded and the reputation that followed it. His words were blunt, cutting through her sincerity. Hurt flickered across her face as she told him not to say something so painful and dismissive. Trying to lighten the heaviness of the moment, she handed him a small item and explained that she had managed to obtain what he had asked for the last time they spoke. Jaehyun snatched it from her hand so abruptly that it startled her. She released a soft sigh and remarked that he had never once complimented her, not even in passing. Yet she remained by his side, knowing that expecting tenderness from him was futile. Soon after, guards escorted Jaehyun back toward the cell block. As he walked through the corridor, the prisoners lowered their heads in respect. The atmosphere shifted subtly in his presence, as though the hierarchy of the prison reorganized itself around him. Upon entering his cell, he called out for Byung-gu. The man immediately stepped forward and addressed him respectfully as Hyung-nim. Jaehyun asked whether the requested item was ready. Byung-gu assured him that everything had been prepared exactly as instructed. Jaehyun offered rare praise, acknowledging his loyalty. Inwardly, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Tomorrow has finally arrived. The following morning, an announcement echoed throughout the prison. Hyung-nim was being released, and everyone should offer their farewell. The inmates gathered, voices rising in unison as they urged him to take care of himself outside. They addressed him again as Hyung-nim, a title earned through dominance and fear rather than kindness. Jaehyun told them they would meet again beyond those walls. The words carried both promise and warning. They nodded and offered their goodbyes as he walked away without looking back. Outside the prison gates, freedom felt unfamiliar. The world seemed wider, yet colder. He unfolded a small chit of paper he had kept hidden. Written on it were precise instructions. 4 a.m., Jamsil Bridge, followed by a string of numbers. The message was brief, but it carried the weight of destiny. Tomorrow, before dawn, the final step would unfold. Later that night, Jaehyun walked through the dimly lit streets. Neon lights reflected off damp pavement, and the city hummed with restless energy. Nearby, a couple was engaged in their evening workout routine, their laughter cutting through the quiet. They noticed Jaehyun's presence, but quickly dismissed him as just another stranger passing by. The stillness shifted when a red Ferrari pulled up beside him. Its engine purred with quiet power before coming to a stop. Jaehyun turned as the door opened, and the same young woman stepped out, her expression bright with excitement. She remarked that she never expected to meet him again outside prison walls. There was a playful confidence in her tone as she asked how he felt after being released. Jaehyun replied that too many things had changed, making it hard for him to feel anything clearly. She slipped her hand around his arm and teased that she looked prettier now that they were meeting in the open world. She admitted that she should have known better than to doubt herself. Then she presented another gift. Placing a mobile phone carefully against herself before offering it to him, she explained that it was for him. When Jaehyun questioned it with a glance, she clarified that it was a hand phone and insisted he could not roam the city without one. She would not even be able to reach him otherwise. She had already set it up so that her number was saved, and he could also track the location of the person he was searching for. Without hesitation, Jaehyun snatched the phone from her grasp. This time, however, he offered a brief word of gratitude, though it lacked warmth. She let out a soft sigh, admitting that she had hoped for something more than simple thanks. Yet, she understood that Jaehyun was not a man who offered affection easily. As the night deepened around them, he stood beneath the city lights, the weight of tomorrow pressing heavily on his mind. The bridge awaited, and with it, the irreversible path he had chosen. After completing what she believed to be her final responsibility in the unfolding chain of events, she escorted Jaehyun to her car without hesitation. The atmosphere between them was restrained, almost heavy with unspoken understanding. She drove him in silence to the exact location he had requested, her expression composed and unreadable. When they arrived, she gently brought the vehicle to a stop and informed him in a calm, detached tone that her role in the matter ended there. The remainder, she stated, was entirely his to handle. Jaehyun acknowledged her words with quiet agreement. Without further exchange, she drove away, leaving him standing alone with his intentions. Determined and resolute, Jaehyun entered the Daewoo truck and began driving towards Seoul. The city lights flickered faintly in the distance as he checked the location on his device. His gaze hardened, and his foot pressed more firmly against the accelerator. The engine roared as the truck surged forward, cutting through the road with growing speed. His thoughts seemed consumed by a singular purpose, one that burned intensely behind his eyes. Meanwhile, in another vehicle traveling along the same stretch of road, a man drove at a steady, ordinary pace, unaware of the danger approaching him. In a sudden and violent moment, Jaehyun's Daewoo collided with the man's car. The impact was devastating. Metal crushed against metal, and the force of the collision sent shockwaves through both vehicles. Without hesitation, Jaehyun stepped out and approached the wreckage. His face was distorted by rage as he shouted for the man to die, his voice echoing harshly against the twisted remains of the car. He struck the damaged vehicle repeatedly, driven by fury that seemed to eclipse reason. Inside the crushed car, the injured man struggled to remain conscious. Blood blurred his vision, and pain surged through his body. Through the haze, he managed to focus on Jaehyun's face. Recognition flickered briefly in his eyes before darkness overtook him, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Tears welled up in Jaehyun's eyes as he stood over the wreckage. Yet, strangely, those tears were accompanied by a faint, unsettling smile. It seemed to him that if the man were to die so easily, it would almost be disappointing. The thought twisted into something darker, and soon a low, menacing laughter escaped him, echoing into the night. A few hours later, the incident dominated the morning news. Reports announced that Kim Chan-sub, the executive director of the Universe Group, had sustained severe injuries in a motor vehicle accident earlier that day. The broadcast also noted the alarming increase in similar traffic accidents occurring in quick succession. The report's tone was grave, suggesting a troubling pattern. Elsewhere, the young man at the center of the chaos reflected on the news. Believing that the injured man might have survived the accident, he decided it would be wiser to confirm the situation personally. At Ward 605, 2 guards stood firmly outside the hospital room, maintaining strict security. Inside, the patient lay unconscious, surrounded by sterile silence and the rhythmic hum of medical equipment. Suddenly, a disturbance broke out in the corridor. The guards attempted to prevent a determined young man from entering the ward. They demanded his identity and questioned his purpose. The raised voices carried into the room, stirring the injured patient from his fragile state of unconsciousness. At that moment, a poised young woman appeared. She was the personal secretary of the patient. With calm authority, she inquired about the commotion and asked the guards to clarify the identity of the young man attempting to enter. When the boy finally stepped inside the room, the patient's eyes widened with recognition. He identified him as Han Jaehyun. Jaehyun himself appeared momentarily stunned. The patient, despite his weakened condition, lifted a trembling hand and pointed toward him, informing his secretary that this was the very person he had spoken about earlier. He addressed her simply as Ha. She turned toward Jaehyun with a composed smile, her expression softening as recognition dawned. She identified him as the individual who had once saved the executive director's life. Moving closer, she offered a sincere apology for the uncomfortable situation caused by the guards. In the same breath, she expressed her heartfelt gratitude to Han Jaehyun for rescuing executive director Kim Chan-sub, acknowledging that, without his intervention, the outcome might have been far worse. The tension in the room shifted subtly as past actions and present consequences began to intertwine in ways none of them could fully escape. The news left Han Jae-hyun visibly startled. Secretary Ha explained that during the critical moments when Kim Chan-sub drifted in and out of consciousness, he had repeatedly murmured Jaehyun's name. Hearing this unsettled Jaehyun more than he allowed anyone to see. Outwardly, he remained composed, but inwardly, he struggled to understand how he had become the one to save Kim Chan-sub. According to Chan-sub, the incident had happened suddenly. Someone had collided with him without warning, and in the confusion that followed, there had been no one nearby to help. He had felt his strength fading, his vision dimming, and the terrifying sensation that his life was slipping away. In those desperate moments, he had believed it was the end. Then, unexpectedly, Han Jae-hyun appeared and saved him. The irony was not lost on Jae-hyun, that he himself had not even realized what he had done at the time. The strange coincidence made him wonder whether some unseen thread connected them, perhaps even from lives long past. Secretary Ha, representing the Universe Group, expressed profound gratitude. She assured Jae-hyun that everyone at the company felt indebted to him. With sincere formality, she promised they would do everything within their power to repay his kindness and to demonstrate their appreciation in meaningful ways. Her words, however, stirred memories Jae-hyun had long tried to bury. He recalled the tragic day his father and mother had died. The grief of that loss still burned within him. He remembered Kim Chan-sub's cold voice telling him that none of it would have happened if Jae-hyun had quietly taken responsibility. Chansub had accused him of being the cause of his own parents' deaths. At that time, Jae-hyun had been brutally injured, crying out in agony and despair. Through his tears and pain, he had sworn that he would one day kill Chansub. The vow had been forged in blood and heartbreak. Remembering that moment now reignited his anger. His jaw tightened as the old fury resurfaced. Yet beneath the rage was a faint acknowledgement that perhaps fate had intervened for a reason. He had never truly been satisfied with how things had ended between them. Perhaps this unexpected turn was an opportunity. In a calm voice that concealed his turbulent thoughts, he remarked that it was a relief to know Chansub was recovering well. Then he requested a favor. Secretary Ha assured him immediately that he needed only speak, and anything within their ability would be granted. The scene soon shifted to a lavish celebration held to mark Chansub's discharge from the hospital. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and music. Friends gathered around him, raising glasses in relief and excitement. One of them admitted that he had been genuinely afraid Chansub might die, though he quickly added that he had known all along that Chansub was too stubborn to leave the world so easily. Chansub laughed at the drama, teasing them for making such a fuss over him. Amid the festivities, Chansub seemed entirely at ease, enjoying the attention and the company of a beautiful young woman at his side. The mood was lighthearted and indulgent. Then, without warning, the door opened. The sudden sound drew everyone's attention. Conversations paused, as all eyes turned toward the entrance. The woman beside Chansub glanced at him curiously and asked whether he had been expecting someone else. A subtle smile curved across Chansub's lips as he revealed that he had indeed invited one more guest. At that precise moment, Han Jae-hyun stepped into the room. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Chansub greeted him warmly, his tone unusually welcoming. He told Jae-hyun not to remain standing awkwardly at the entrance and urged him to take a seat. Taking measured steps, Jae-hyun joined them and sat beside Chansub. Chansub expressed mild surprise that Jae-hyun had arrived earlier than anticipated, as though pleased by his promptness. Before the tension could settle, the woman and another man playfully leaned toward Jae-hyun. The woman clung to him, gushing with exaggerated admiration, calling him cute. Her curiosity quickly turned to his age, and she asked about it openly, her tone teasing and intrigued, while the room watched with interest at the unfolding dynamic. She had initially assumed that he must be a friend of Chansub, and from that quiet assumption, she concluded that he was probably around the same age as Chansub as well. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him at first glance, yet something about his presence unsettled the group. Among them, the young man in the purple shirt kept staring, his brows slowly drawing together. The more he looked at Jae-hyun, the more a strange sense of familiarity crept over him, as though he were trying to recall a face buried in an unpleasant memory. The atmosphere shifted the moment Chansub clearly called out Jae-hyun's name. At the sound of it, the boy in the purple shirt abruptly rose from his seat, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. Anger flared across his face as recognition struck him. He loudly accused Jae-hyun of having lived in jail, his tone laced with accusation and disbelief. A crooked smile tugged at his lips as he mockingly commented on how much Jae-hyun's appearance had changed since the last time they had seen him. His words carried both ridicule and curiosity, as though he were savoring the moment. Another boy joined in, claiming that he had heard rumors about Jae-hyun's imprisonment and that he was surprised to see him already released. The statement was delivered casually, but its implications hung heavily in the air. A girl with golden hair leaned forward, her eyes scanning Jae-hyun's face with scrutiny. She remarked that he had changed so much that she had almost failed to recognize him. In a tone that blended curiosity with faint condescension, she wondered aloud whether he still remembered her. As Jae-hyun looked at her, fragments of the past resurfaced vividly in his mind. He remembered a humiliating afternoon from years ago. The same girl had once ordered him to open his mouth so she could flick cigarette ashes into it for her own amusement. She had threatened him coldly, warning that if even a speck of ash landed on her instead, he would be as good as dead. That cruel face now stood before him once again. He recognized her as Kang Min-jung, the same girl who had once taken pleasure in degrading him. Despite the bitterness rising within him, Jae-hyun forced a calm smile and replied that, of course, he remembered her, for there was no possible way he could ever forget. Nearby, a girl dressed in a striking red suit reacted with visible shock upon hearing that Jae-hyun had a criminal past. The young man in the purple shirt seized the opportunity to escalate the tension. With a mischievous and almost delighted smile, he declared that Jae-hyun had killed people, emphasizing that it was none other than his own parents. He added mockingly that he had not realized murderers were released from prison so early. His words were sharp, meant to wound and provoke. The accusation struck Jae-hyun like a blow, and anger surged through him, threatening to break his composed exterior. Before he could react, Chansub moved. In a sudden burst of fury, he grabbed a bottle and smashed it against the purple-shirted boy's head. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room. Without hesitation, Chansub forced the stunned boy down onto the table, pressing him harshly and warning him to stop speaking nonsense and to shut his mouth immediately. The violence of the act left everyone frozen in disbelief. The group erupted in shock, demanding to know what Chansub thought he was doing. Their voices trembled between fear and outrage. Chansub, however, was beyond caring about their protests. He shouted that he had called them there for a reason, that he had intended to give them an opportunity. Confusion spread among them as they demanded to know what opportunity he was referring to. With a dark and unyielding expression, Chansub revealed his intention. He ordered them to beg Jaehyun. His command stunned them into silence, their faces reflecting disbelief and confusion. The idea seemed unthinkable to them. Chansub's voice hardened further as he reminded them of what they had done to Jaehyun back in high school. For those past actions, he declared, they should be on their knees, asking for forgiveness. His tone turned sharp as he challenged their reluctance, making it clear that refusal was not an option. Under the weight of his glare and the tension in the room, they began offering hurried apologies. Their words tumbled out awkwardly, lacking sincerity. Chansub immediately shouted that their response was insufficient. He reminded them that he had told them to beg, not merely to mutter apologies. Then, in a final command that sent another wave of shock through the group, he ordered them to kneel before Jaehyun. The demand hung heavily in the air, leaving everyone stunned by how far the situation had escalated. After a long moment of visible hesitation, they slowly lowered themselves to their knees, the weight of pride and fear pressing heavily upon them. The atmosphere in the room had already grown suffocating, thick with tension that no one dared to ease. Minju, however, refused to mirror their submission. She let out a sharp scoff, her disbelief evident in the way she folded her arms and tilted her head with cold defiance. She could not understand why Chansub was going to such lengths for Jaehyun. In her frustration, she accused him of losing his memory after the accident, suggesting that perhaps he had forgotten who truly stood beside him all this time. Her words struck something deep within Chansub. Without allowing himself time to reconsider, he raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sharp sound echoed in the room, startling everyone present. Minju staggered slightly, stunned not only by the pain, but by the humiliation. She demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Chansub bent slightly to meet her gaze, his voice low and unwavering, as he declared that he would not make any exception for her, no matter who she believed herself to be. Before the situation could spiral further, Jaehyun stepped forward and placed a steady hand on Chansub's shoulder. His voice was calm, though firm, as he urged him to stop. He explained that forcing apologies would not ease his feelings or repair what had already been broken. Nevertheless, he admitted that he appreciated everything Chansub had done for him. Chansub exhaled sharply, replying that if that was truly how Jaehyun felt, then he would respect it. Still, he insisted that he could not simply allow Minju's behavior to pass without consequence. The confrontation intensified as Chansub grabbed Minju by the collar of her shirt, not to harm her further, but to assert control over the escalating chaos. He warned her that if she refused to speak sincerely, then she would have to face the consequences of her stubbornness in other ways. Under the heavy silence of the room and the unyielding stares surrounding her, Minju finally muttered an apology toward Jaehyun. However, the bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. She laced her apology with subtle insults, making it clear that her pride remained intact. That was enough to ignite Chansub's anger once more. He seized her by the hair, forcing her to look directly at him, and told her that empty words would not resolve anything. He turned briefly to Jaehyun, silently seeking his opinion. Jaehyun gave a reluctant nod, neither approving nor entirely condemning the harshness of the moment, but signaling that Minju needed to understand the seriousness of her actions. Chansub dragged Minju toward the door, ignoring her cries as she accused him of doing everything solely for Jaehyun. She demanded to know how he could treat her this way after everything. At the threshold, Chansub suddenly released her. His expression shifted from fury to cold calculation. He asked whether she truly wished to continue seeing him and whether she was prepared to embarrass him publicly with her behavior. His words struck deeper than any physical force could have. Minju fell silent, unable to respond. Outside the room, Chansub paused and wished Jaehyun good luck in a voice that carried both warning and expectation. He then joined the others waiting nearby. When someone mentioned that they had not intended to drink that evening, Chansub insisted, and eventually they all agreed to have drinks together, as though attempting to dissolve the lingering tension in alcohol. Meanwhile, inside the room, Minju sat rigidly, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. She muttered under her breath that Chansub had always been unstable, that his obsessive loyalty bordered on madness. Turning toward Jaehyun, she told him he should have simply claimed that they had been doing cardio training together, suggesting that such a harmless excuse would have avoided the entire confrontation. Jaehyun looked at her steadily and replied that she was asking him to lie to Chansub. His tone carried quiet disbelief. Minju's voice rose as she argued that the idea of her doing cardio training with him sounded absurd, insisting that it made no sense at all. The tension between them snapped once more when Jaehyun suddenly grabbed her by the neck, not tightly enough to injure, but firmly enough to silence her protests. His eyes darkened as he demanded to know why it made no sense, his restraint finally giving way to anger that had been building throughout the ordeal. The room fell into heavy silence again, each of them trapped in the consequences of pride, loyalty, and resentment that none of them fully understood, yet all of them continued to fuel. In a tense and emotionally charged moment, he stepped closer to her and pulled at her shirt, exposing her chest. Startled and humiliated, Minju immediately cried out and crossed her arms over herself in an attempt to shield her body. Her voice trembled with anger as she demanded whether he truly believed that Chansub would allow him to get away with something like this. The thought that he felt untouchable only deepened her outrage. He, however, remained composed. A slow, confident smile formed on his lips as he reminded her that he had already told her to use her body. His tone carried an unsettling certainty, as though everything unfolding had been inevitable. Without hesitation, he removed his pants as well, his gaze fixed intensely on her. What followed was what he mockingly referred to as cardio training, a physical struggle disguised under the name of exercise. The atmosphere between them was heavy, filled with tension, dominance, and unresolved emotions. During the encounter, his mind drifted to the past. He recalled how she once laughed at Jaehyun, ridiculing him for appearing weak and desperate. She had mocked the sight of a man begging, calling him a loser without dignity. The memory fueled something darker within him. He thought bitterly about the girl who, in the future, would have to endure this same so-called cardio training with him, and he almost felt a twisted sense of pity for her. Outside the room, the rest of the group continued singing, unaware at first of what was happening within. Their voices echoed down the hallway until, suddenly, they heard Minju's cry. The sound cut through their song, causing them to stop abruptly in shock. Confusion spread among them, and concern flickered across their faces. Before panic could escalate, Chansub stepped forward calmly and assured everyone that there was no need to worry. He encouraged them to continue singing, brushing aside their unease as though nothing serious was taking place. Inside, after everything was over, Minju pulled herself together and moved toward the exit, her expression hardened and distant. As she reached the door, he asked where she thought she was going. She snapped back sharply, telling him not to speak to her and declaring that it was all over between them now. Her voice carried finality, as if she were determined to reclaim some fragment of control. However, Jaehyun's voice interrupted the tension. He questioned the very idea that it was over, implying that the conflict between them had not yet reached its conclusion. His words hung in the air with quiet defiance. According to him, nothing had truly finished. The confrontation reignited, and soon, the two were locked once more in what they bitterly referred to as their wrestling battle, their struggle reflecting deeper, unresolved emotions. Time passed before the door finally opened. Everyone outside turned toward it simultaneously, their curiosity and anxiety returning. When the two of them emerged, the atmosphere shifted again. Chansub observed them carefully and remarked that it had taken longer than he expected. He asked about the experience with casual interest. The response he received was that it had not been bad. Hearing this, Chansub's lips curved into a satisfied smile, and he remarked that this was a relief, as though the outcome had aligned perfectly with his expectations. Jaehyun's thoughts drifted back to the past, to the day everything began to unravel inside the classroom that had once felt ordinary and safe. The memory returned to him with painful clarity. He remembered how the boys had mocked the situation, claiming that Minsu was merely overacting again. Their voices echoed loudly through the room as they called out for Chansub, shouting that Minsu might actually die if things continued. Yet, their words carried no real concern. They sounded entertained, as though they were watching a performance rather than witnessing cruelty unfold before them. At the center of the chaos, Chansub had Minsu's neck locked tightly in his arms. His grip was firm and deliberate, and he declared coldly that he was doing it for a reason, as if there were some twisted justification behind the violence. Beneath that crushing hold, Minsu had struggled desperately, his movements frantic and weak at the same time. He had pleaded for Chansub to stop, his voice strained and filled with fear. His desperation had only added to the suffocating tension in the room. Minju had finally spoken up, her voice trembling with anger as she scolded them for behaving so cruelly in front of her. She could not tolerate watching such brutality take place openly inside the classroom. Around them, other students had remained at their desks, pretending to focus on their work while fear hung heavily in the air. No one dared to interfere. The classroom, meant to be a place of learning, had transformed into a silent stage for humiliation and terror. Jaehyun had stood among them as nothing more than a bystander, or at least that was what he had believed himself to be until that day. For a long time, he had convinced himself that staying quiet was the safest option. However, something within him had finally snapped. His patience had worn thin, and the sight of Minsu's suffering had stirred a fragile courage inside him. He had walked toward Chansub, his steps hesitant yet determined. Scratching the back of his neck nervously, he had requested that Chansub stop and mentioned that the teacher would arrive soon. His voice had lacked confidence, but it carried a faint hope that reason might calm the situation. In that moment, Jaehyun would later realize that he should not have intervened so lightly. His attempt, though sincere, had only provoked Chansub. The bully had turned toward him slowly, his expression darkening with irritation. He had demanded to know who Jaehyun thought he was, and mocked him as if he were some knight in shining armor trying to rescue the weak. The taunt had drawn laughter from the others. Fear had immediately overtaken Jaehyun. Instead of standing firm, he had denied any heroic intention, retreating into uncertainty. That hesitation had been his greatest mistake. Without warning, Chansub had kicked him hard in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor in agony. The impact had stolen his breath, leaving him gasping. Chansub had then pressed his shoe against Jaehyun's face and ordered him to repeat what he had said earlier. The humiliation had burned more painfully than the physical blow. From that day forward, Jaehyun's life had changed completely. With a cruel smile, Chansub had punched him in the stomach again, causing him to vomit on the classroom floor. His friends had praised the strike as if it were an impressive achievement. Laughter filled the room while Jaehyun lay there in pain. That single moment had marked the beginning of a relentless nightmare. Every day afterward had felt like living in hell. Jaehyun would breathe heavily as he forced himself to look up at Chansub, who mocked him by asking if he was enjoying himself. Bit by bit, Jaehyun's ordinary life had been stripped away. His belongings had disappeared, one after another, taken without consequence. The bullying had not ended with the final school bell. It had followed him beyond the gates and into the hours that should have been his refuge. As time passed, the cruelty had only intensified. The laughter grew louder, the beatings harsher, and the isolation deeper. All Jaehyun could do was endure. He clung to the fragile hope that one day they would grow bored of tormenting him. He wished that they would lose interest and move on to something else, leaving him forgotten and free. Yet it often felt as though Chansub delighted in prolonging his suffering, smiling as if Jaehyun's pain were a private joke. In the darkest moments, Jaehyun found himself questioning everything he had once believed. He wondered whether God truly existed, because if a higher power were watching, surely this would have been stopped. The silence in response to his silent prayers felt heavier than the blows he endured, and so he remained trapped in a reality where cruelty reigned unchecked, forced to carry both physical wounds and the growing doubt that no one, not even heaven, was listening. Minsu and Jaehyun had once been ordinary boys whose only mistake was being different in a place that had no tolerance for it. Day after day, they endured relentless bullying at school, targeted by a group that found cruel amusement in their suffering. The harassment grew more vicious over time, fed by silence from bystanders and indifference from authority figures. What began as taunts and shoves gradually spiraled into something far darker. Then tragedy struck. Minsu was found dead under circumstances that shook the entire community. Before grief could even settle, accusations began to circulate. Whispers spread through hallways and neighborhoods alike, and soon those whispers hardened into a single, damning claim. Jaehyun was responsible for Minsu's death. A group of students, eager to protect themselves and conceal their own involvement, quietly aligned their stories. Together, they crafted a narrative that placed all blame on Jaehyun's shoulders. Their voices overlapped convincingly enough that the police accepted their statements without hesitation. No one truly listened when Jaehyun tried to speak. His words were dismissed as desperate lies from a guilty boy. Jaehyun's parents refused to accept the version of events presented to them. Convinced of their son's innocence, they made a sacrifice that altered their lives completely. They resigned from their jobs and devoted themselves entirely to searching for a witness, anyone who might reveal the truth and expose the conspiracy. They knocked on doors, pleaded with former classmates, and followed faint leads that often dissolved into dead ends. Their determination, however, only deepened the resentment of those who had orchestrated the lie. Among them was Chansub, whose calm exterior concealed mounting irritation. One afternoon, while he stood with a girl who had helped spread false accusations, she attempted to reassure him in a hushed voice. She expressed confidence that everything would settle down eventually and insisted that they would never be caught. Her attempt at comfort only inflamed him. Fear lurked beneath his anger, and it surfaced violently. Without warning, he drove his fist into her stomach and seized her by the hair, yanking her head back so she could see the fury in his eyes. In a sharp, controlled voice, he warned her that careless words could destroy them all. If anyone overheard even a fragment of their conversation, suspicion might shift in their direction. He coldly suggested that perhaps she wished to take responsibility herself and face the consequences alone. The girl, trembling and shaken, quickly apologized. Chansub sneered at her weakness and told her that silence was the only sensible choice for someone like her. He declared that she should leave the matter entirely to him, because he alone knew how to ensure their safety. As weeks passed, Jaehyun's life unraveled. The weight of false accusation pressed heavily on him, and the loss of Min-soo haunted his every thought. One night, tragedy struck again. Flames consumed his family home, devouring years of memories in a matter of minutes. Smoke choked the sky as neighbors gathered in shock. Jaehyun cried out for his parents amid the chaos, his voice breaking as others attempted to restrain and calm him. Through the haze of firelight, Chansub appeared behind him. His tone was disturbingly casual, as he remarked that he had never witnessed a house burn before. He observed that the flames were spreading quickly and speculated that the house must have been old to collapse so easily. The indifference in his voice cut deeper than the destruction itself. Jaehyun clenched his teeth, a sickening certainty forming in his mind that Chansub was responsible for the blaze. Chansub denied the accusation without hesitation, his expression devoid of guilt. He mockingly implied that even if he had set the fire, Jaehyun was powerless to do anything about it. The provocation ignited something uncontrollable within Jaehyun. With a raw, anguished cry, he lunged forward, vowing that he would kill Chansub for everything he had done. His attack was reckless and fueled by grief, and Chansub easily sidestepped him. With chilling composure, Chansub replied that Jaehyun and his parents should have known their place from the beginning. Then he struck Jaehyun squarely in the face, sending him crashing backwards onto the ground. Blood mingled with tears as Jaehyun struggled to rise. Even in pain, he shouted that he would kill Chansub no matter what it took. The promise was no longer an impulsive outburst, but a vow etched into his very being. Years later, Jaehyun stood alone, before a cold stone wall where his parents' memorial rested. The world around him was quiet, yet the echoes of the past remained loud in his mind. He bowed his head and apologized softly for taking so long to visit them. He spoke as though they were still listening, assuring them that he was surviving and urging them not to worry about him. Beneath his calm words, however, lay a storm that had never subsided. He asked for a little more patience. He promised to make Chansub suffer in every possible way before sending him to join them. The boy who had once cried helplessly in the ashes of his home was gone. In his place stood someone hardened by loss, driven by vengeance, and determined to rewrite the ending that had once been forced upon him. The boy stepped out of the hospital entrance with thick white dressings wrapped around his ribs and cheek, each movement stiff with pain. Only a few nights earlier, he had been brutally beaten at a nightclub by Chansub after drunkenly spouting reckless nonsense. The humiliation had stung far more deeply than the bruises. As he descended the concrete steps, bitterness twisted inside him, and he muttered darkly that he wished Chansub had died back then. He did not realize he was being watched. A short distance away, beneath the dim hospital lights, stood a tall figure in a dark hoodie. The hood was drawn low, shadowing his face and concealing his expression. It was Jaehyun. He had been waiting in silence, hands tucked into his pockets, observing every step the injured boy took. When the boy finally noticed him, he paused, his brows furrowed in confusion. He stared at the hooded figure and asked sarcastically whether Jaehyun actually lived at the hospital, because surely he had not come all this way just to visit him. A smirk crept across his swollen lips as a thought occurred to him. Perhaps his plan had worked. Perhaps something had gone exactly as he intended. He tilted his head and wondered aloud why Jaehyun would show up now. Then he gave a mocking smile and remarked that, of course, Chansub would always take Jaehyun's side. With deliberate cruelty, he sneered and asked whether Jaehyun had been licking Chansub's shoes to earn such loyalty. Jaehyun did not respond. Instead, he slowly lifted his head. His face remained partially hidden, but his eyes were visible beneath the hood, cold, unreadable, and terrifyingly calm. The silence stretched thin, pressing heavily against the boy's chest. The mockery faltered. Unease crept into his voice as he asked what that strange look meant. He reminded Jaehyun that he had once been beaten badly himself, as though trying to assert dominance through shared violence. Jaehyun let out a slow, controlled sigh. Without warning, his fist shot forward. The punch landed squarely against the boy's face with a sickening crack. The impact was so forceful that the boy stumbled backwards, blood spilling from his mouth as his front teeth shattered and fell onto the pavement. Before he could regain his balance, Jaehyun grabbed him by the collar and pulled him forward, delivering another merciless blow. The boy collapsed to his knees, trembling. He raised his hands weakly and begged Jaehyun to stop. Jaehyun's voice, when he finally spoke, was steady and chillingly composed. He said he did not want excuses, apologies, or drama. He wanted answers, nothing more, nothing less. Then he asked who had given testimony to the police when Min-soo died. At the mention of Min-soo, the boy's face was drained of color. He stammered that it had happened a long time ago, that it was an old incident, and that dredging it up now would change nothing. Jaehyun crouched slightly, his gaze never leaving the boy's terrified eyes. He asked quietly whether the boy truly did not remember. Then, in a tone devoid of mercy, he said that if memory was the problem, he would be glad to help refresh it. The next moment, Jaehyun drove his foot down with brutal force. A sharp crack echoed through the empty space as the boy's leg snapped under the impact. A scream tore from his throat, raw and desperate, as agony consumed him. Unmoved by the cries, Jaehyun reached into his jacket and withdrew a knife. The blade glinted faintly under the hospital lights. He pressed it coldly against the boy's neck, just beneath the jawline. His voice remained eerily calm as he asked once more whether the boy still could not remember. When Jaehyun applied slight pressure, the sharp edge biting into the skin, the boy broke completely. Tears streamed down his face as he gasped that he would tell everything. He would reveal the truth, but only on one condition. Jaehyun must promise not to tell anyone that the information came from him. Jaehyun's grip tightened on the knife. He did not offer reassurance. He did not negotiate. In a low, commanding tone, he demanded the answer. The boy answered in a trembling voice that everyone in their group had been involved. All 7 of them had given statements and stood as witnesses. None had refused. He insisted that Jaehyun already knew how things worked among them. After all, no one dared to say no to Chansub. According to him, defiance was not an option, it had never been. He claimed he had only done what he did to survive. Fear, not loyalty, had guided his actions. Jaehyun listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. Then, in a calm but piercing tone, he said, "Tell him the name of the person who burned his house." The boy's eyes widened. He apologized repeatedly, his voice cracking, as he confessed that he could not reveal that detail. He insisted there were limits to what he could say. The refusal seemed to strike a nerve. In one swift movement, Jaehyun took the knife from the boy's shaking hand. The sudden motion made the boy cry out in fear. Jaehyun leaned closer and told him coldly that he wanted nothing but the truth. No excuses, no half answers, no evasions. The boy swallowed hard and, after a moment of hesitation, revealed that everything had been orchestrated by Yoo Seo-young. The plan, he claimed, had been hers from the beginning. As Jaehyun processed this revelation, memories of Seo-young surfaced. He began to suspect that she had not merely been following orders. There had always been something calculating in her eyes, something that suggested ambition beyond obedience. Narrowing his gaze, Jaehyun asked if the boy was hiding anything else. The boy shook his head frantically, insisting that he had told him everything he knew. He swore there were no more secrets left to uncover. Without warning, Jaehyun drew the blade lightly across the boy's neck, leaving a shallow cut. A thin line of red appeared, enough to sting, but not enough to kill. The boy froze in terror. Jaehyun stepped back and remarked coolly that the wound would not be fatal. The boy would survive. After all, he might still prove useful. With that chilling statement, Jaehyun turned and walked away, leaving the boy trembling in the dim light. The scene shifted to Minju, who sat alone in her room, her thoughts burning with anger. She muttered Jaehyun's name under her breath, resentment evident in her expression. Her mind drifted back to a humiliating memory, an encounter in Chansub's office that she wished she could forget. She had stormed into his office that day, demanding to know if he truly understood what he had done to her. Her voice had echoed against the cold walls as she confronted him. Chansub, however, had responded without remorse. He had reminded her that she had agreed to the arrangement. His tone was calm, almost dismissive. Minju's response had been sharp and fierce. She had accused him of forcing her into it, of cornering her until she had no choice but to comply. Her words had trembled with anger and humiliation. Instead of acknowledging her pain, Chansub had snapped that she was being too noisy. He had shouted for her to stop and, in a degrading gesture, thrown money toward her as if that could settle everything. The bills had scattered across the floor, each one a symbol of her wounded pride. The memory still burned inside her. Back in her room, she threw objects across the space in frustration, unable to contain her fury. The sound of breaking items echoed around her. Then, unexpectedly, there was a knock at the door. Minju froze. Confusion crept in. She didn't expect anyone to arrive at that time. For a brief moment, she suspected it might be Chansub, perhaps coming to apologize. Bitterly, she muttered that it was too late for apologies. But when she opened the door, she found Jaehyun standing there instead. Startled, she began to question his sudden appearance. But before she could raise her voice, Jaehyun placed his hand firmly over her mouth, signaling her to remain silent. His eyes were intense, focused. Without a word, he played a recording on his phone. It was the boy's voice, confessing the involvement of all 7 of them. As the recording ended, Jaehyun fixed her with a sharp stare and demanded to know whether she had been involved as well. Minju pushed his hand away and shouted, demanding to know why he had barged into her house without warning, especially at such an hour. Her anger clashed with his cold determination. Yet Jaehyun did not respond to her protests. Instead, as if channeling his agitation into something physical, he began putting her through a grueling cardio routine, forcing her to move, to run, to keep up with his relentless pace. It was as though he was testing her endurance, both physical and emotional, while silently measuring the truth hidden behind her defiance. After finishing her cardio training, Minju had barely caught her breath when Jaehyun crossed a line that could not be undone. Without hesitation, he took a photograph of her in her most vulnerable state and calmly declared that he would keep it as insurance. His tone was casual, almost amused, as though he had merely taken a harmless souvenir rather than something that could destroy her dignity. He went on to remark that he had assumed she wanted revenge, implying that her silence suggested otherwise. Minju's shock quickly turned into fury. She shouted at him that she did not care about any revenge and demanded that he delete the picture immediately. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from anger and humiliation. Jaehyun, however, only mocked her. He compared her to discarded trash, something thrown away and easily replaced. He then speculated aloud that perhaps Minju did not truly wish to take revenge on Chansub. Perhaps, he suggested, her resentment was directed elsewhere. He mentioned Yoo So-young. The mere sound of that name caused Minju to flinch involuntarily. It was a reaction she could not hide. Jaehyun noticed it instantly. With a faint, knowing smile, he remarked that Minju had never been on Seo-young's level and never would be. Minju could no longer restrain herself. She shouted at him to be silent, insisting that he knew nothing about her or the situation. Her pride refused to let his words settle unchallenged. Yet Jaehyun remained unbothered. Instead of escalating the argument, he extended his hand toward her in a calculated gesture of partnership. He offered to help her achieve revenge, presenting himself as the ally she supposedly needed. Minju rejected his offer without hesitation. She declared firmly that she did not need his assistance. Her independence was the last thing she was willing to surrender. Jaehyun merely nodded, as if he had expected that response. Then, with deliberate slowness, he displayed the incriminating photograph once again. He suggested that she think carefully about the situation, implying that they were not such a bad match after all. There was an unsettling confidence in his voice, as though he believed circumstances would eventually force her to reconsider. The scene then shifted to the towering company building owned by Chansub. In front of the sleek glass structure, a luxurious car came to a smooth stop. From it stepped a strikingly beautiful woman, poised and self-assured. She was on a phone call, informing the person on the other end that she had just arrived and would be heading upstairs shortly. Her tone was professional and composed, as she inquired about the preparation of the samples she had previously requested. As she ended the call, her attention was suddenly caught by a familiar figure nearby. To her surprise, Jaehyun was standing there. She had assumed he would have already left the premises, but his presence unsettled her. The fact that he remained suggested that something significant was unfolding. Turning slightly, she called out the name of her bodyguard, Song. He responded immediately and obediently, awaiting her instruction. She calmly expressed her desire to learn more about Jaehyun and his recent activities. Song accepted the order without hesitation, understanding that discretion and efficiency were expected. Meanwhile, inside Chansub's office, the atmosphere was far less composed. Chansub was engaged in his own cardio session, accompanied by a young woman. The rhythm of the workout filled the spacious office until it was abruptly interrupted. Without knocking or requesting permission, another woman entered the room. The intrusion instantly ignited Chansub's temper. He shouted at her, demanding to know whether she had ever learned the basic courtesy of knocking before entering. His irritation was evident, sharp, and unfiltered. Unfazed by his anger, she responded coolly that at least his younger brother understood the meaning of embarrassment. Her words carried a subtle edge of criticism. She then shifted the conversation, asking about his health following the recent accident. Though her tone suggested concern, there was an undercurrent of tension between them, hinting at unresolved conflicts and unspoken rivalries that were far from over. He assured her that he was doing well, his tone steady and controlled, despite the tension lingering between them. She had approached him with visible concern, and after a brief pause, she inquired about the person responsible for the accident. Her voice carried a mixture of worry and curiosity, as though she feared the answer yet needed to hear it. Chansub explained that he was still searching for the man behind it, but, so far, he had found nothing. There were no clear leads, no solid evidence, and no closure. His calm demeanor suggested patience, yet beneath it lay a quiet determination. He then shifted the focus of the conversation, asking about her sudden appearance without any prior notice. Her unexpected arrival had caught him off guard, and although he maintained composure, the question lingered in his eyes. Instead of directly answering, she asked whether he remembered the boy who had gone to prison several years ago. The mention of the past stirred old memories. Chansub did not hesitate before recalling the name, Jaehyun. He spoke it evenly, as though the name carried neither hatred nor affection, only history. She revealed that it seemed Jaehyun had been released. There was a hint of uncertainty in her voice, as if she were testing his reaction. Chansub responded calmly that he already knew and had even met Jaehyun a few days earlier. Her composure broke at once. Shock washed over her face, and she struggled to believe what she had just heard. Chansub noticed her reaction and smiled faintly, almost amused by how surprised she was. He explained that they had reconciled and settled the past. His words carried a trace of regret, as he admitted that he would never have done the things he did if he had known how everything would eventually unfold. The weight of remorse was evident in his expression. She found herself unable to comprehend how Jaehyun could have accepted such an apology. Confusion clouded her thoughts. It seemed impossible that someone who had suffered so much would simply forgive and move on. Chansub clarified that Jaehyun had indeed accepted his apology, and if he had not, he would have let Chansub die. He revealed that Jaehyun had been the one who saved him from the accident. This revelation left her even more stunned. The idea that Jaehyun not only forgave him but also saved his life felt implausible to her. In her mind, it did not align with the bitterness she believed must still exist. Elsewhere, in the quiet solitude of his room, Jaehyun stood before a target board he had carefully prepared. His focus was sharp and unwavering. At the center of his new objective was Kim Si-hyung, the beautiful sister of Chansub. Her name was now placed at the heart of his plans, and his expression revealed nothing of his true intentions. Meanwhile, in a completely different setting, laughter echoed brightly. A girl teased Minju relentlessly, recounting how Minju had apparently done cardio training with Han Jae-hyun. She described the situation as utterly hilarious, her laughter ringing out without restraint. Minju, however, sat stiffly, her lips forming a deep pout as irritation simmered within her. The teasing only intensified as the girl declared that Minju had grown up only to become a loser. The remark struck a nerve, and Minju's annoyance became visible. The girl continued, pointing out that Minju was not outright denying anything, which must have meant she secretly liked it. That assumption only deepened Minju's frustration. Finally, unable to endure the mockery any longer, Minju told her to get to the point and explain why she had wanted to see her. Her patience was thinning, and her tone reflected it clearly. The girl responded casually, claiming there was no particular reason. It was simply a visit. Minju let out a long sigh, her irritation softening into exasperation. She remarked that it must be nice to have so much free time to joke around so carelessly. The playful atmosphere remained, yet beneath it lingered unspoken tensions and emotions that neither of them fully addressed. Even after losing her position as the rightful heir and being reduced to crawling in the dirt of humiliation, Yoo Seo-young carried herself with a brittle pride that refused to shatter. The memory of her fall still clung to her, like dust on her clothes, but she masked it with defiance. It was in that fragile state that Minju's careless remark struck her like a slap. The comment, delivered with a faintly sympathetic tone, ignited a spark of fury in Seo-young's chest. She rose abruptly from her seat, her movements sharp and unrestrained, and demanded that Minju repeat what she had just said. Minju, maintaining an air of innocence, replied that she had merely been worried about Seo-young's well-being. She wondered aloud whether she had somehow offended her. The pretense of concern only deepened the tension between them. Seo-young's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, and for a fleeting second, she seemed ready to hurl its contents across Minju's face. Before the situation could escalate further, her mobile phone vibrated against the table. The sharp buzz cut through the charged silence. Seo-young glanced down at the screen. The notification was from Sin-young Group. The message was curt and impersonal. If Yoo Seo-young could be reached, she was requested to contact the accounts department immediately. They were expecting her payment that very day and reminded her to complete the transaction by 11 in the morning. Minju's eyes flickered with suspicion. She remarked that such persistent messages sounded very much like loan repayment notices. Seo-young instantly snatched her phone away, her expression hardening. Minju, undeterred, went on to suggest that Seo-young must have borrowed money from loan sharks. At that critical moment, Secretary Ha arrived. Her presence was composed yet commanding. She politely asked both women to refrain from causing a scene in the establishment. Their previous scandal involving executive Kim Chansub had already attracted enough unwanted attention. Another public altercation would only damage his carefully maintained image. She urged them to exercise caution in public spaces. Addressing Seo-young formally as President Yoo Seo-young, she also asked that she refrain from contacting her regarding private matters. Seo-young responded with a casual scratch at the back of her neck, her tone laced with dry amusement. She remarked that Secretary Ha had arrived much faster than expected. There was no need to continue the discussion there. They could speak outside, as she was finished with her business anyway. Meanwhile, Minju's thoughts churned. She found it peculiar that Ha Yura, the devoted secretary of Kim Chansub, had appeared at that precise moment. The coincidence felt too deliberate to ignore. Seo-young then declared her departure with theatrical nonchalance, claiming she had enjoyed herself. Before leaving, she turned once more to Minju and added a cutting remark. She had heard rumors that Minju had been engaging in intense cardio training sessions with Chansub and had subsequently been discarded. With a faint smirk, she expressed her hope that Minju would not ultimately find herself in a brothel. Humiliated and enraged, Minju immediately placed a call to Jaehyun. His voice on the other end was calm and controlled. He reminded her to stay focused on her assigned role. When she inquired about her next task, he outlined the plan with precision. She agreed without hesitation, but before ending the call, she shouted with unrestrained bitterness that she wanted to see So-young brought to her knees before her. Several days later, Jaehyun was driving when he made another call. He addressed the person on the line as Hyeri and asked how the matter had progressed. On the other end, Hyeri explained that she was still in a meeting. She had increased the deposit as instructed, though the other party continued to complain. For the moment, they had withdrawn but had not yet returned. She admitted that Jaehyun was far more strategic than she had initially assumed. At first, she had not understood why he had insisted that she establish a shell corporation. Now, however, the larger picture was becoming clear. She could see the layers of manipulation and foresight in his design. Jaehyun dismissed her praise with quiet confidence. To him, it was merely a small step in a much larger game that had only just begun. He was already in the building when he noticed the familiar figure approaching. He calmly ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. His expression remained composed, yet his thoughts raced. Jaehyun reflected on what Hyeri had once told him, and he realized that her words had planted the seed of a bold and calculated plan. Following the information Kang Minju had discreetly fed him a few days earlier, he had begun constructing a strategy that revolved around a shell corporation, an entity that would exist only on paper, yet would serve as the perfect vessel for an elaborate financial trap. From the fragments of information he had gathered, it was clear that So-young was burdened with a significant debt, a consequence of her precarious position as the heir to her parents' company. The weight of expectation and obligation pressed heavily on her shoulders. Jaehyun was certain of one thing. She would never accept defeat quietly. Her pride and ambition would not allow her to retreat. Instead, she would push forward even harder, desperately seeking ways to secure more capital and restore her standing. And that, he believed, would be the precise moment to make her an offer so irresistible that she would have no alternative but to accept it. His plan was meticulous. He would establish the Shell Corporation and then subtly leak information about an extraordinary investment opportunity, one so promising that it would seem like a rare stroke of fortune. He anticipated that So-young would be skeptical at first. She was not naive, and her experiences had taught her caution. However, Jaehyun was confident that desperation would erode that skepticism. The greater her financial hunger grew, the faster her doubts would dissolve. In the end, she would find herself unable to resist taking the bait. She would convince herself that she was acting strategically, never realizing that she was stepping directly into the snare he had carefully prepared. Once she committed, Jaehyun intended to tighten the trap. After the initial agreement, he would abruptly increase the required deposit beyond what had originally been discussed. By then, So-young would already be too deeply involved to withdraw without severe consequences. The pressure would force her hand, compelling her to invest even more than she had planned. Meanwhile, So-young sat across from Hyeri, her composure cracking as she listened to the latest update. Shock froze her expression when Hyeri, speaking with visible discomfort, explained that the decision had come from higher authorities within the company. They had revised the terms and increased the deposit requirement. Hyeri apologized repeatedly, insisting that her hands were tied and that the directive had not been hers to question. So-young's restraint finally shattered. She could not believe what she was hearing. The sudden increase felt absurd and unfair. She demanded to know what kind of operation they were running and how she was expected to secure such a large sum on short notice. The entire situation seemed increasingly unstable, and she began to doubt whether the information she had relied upon was even trustworthy. The mounting pressure made it difficult for her to think clearly. At that tense moment, a calm voice interrupted from behind. Jaehyun had approached unnoticed and now stood nearby, asking in a measured tone whether she might require assistance. The unexpected sound startled So-young, and she turned sharply, her eyes narrowing as she demanded to know who he was. He introduced himself simply as Jaehyun. The name struck her like a sudden jolt. Recognition dawned, and memories surfaced, particularly the incident connected to the jail. She stared at him in disbelief, recalling him as the jail guy. Jaehyun responded with faint amusement, though there was a trace of disappointment in his voice. He remarked that he had hoped to be remembered for something more dignified. So-young recovered quickly, masking her surprise with composure. She admitted that she had heard about him and noted that he seemed to have changed significantly since then. Nevertheless, skepticism laced her tone as she questioned how someone like him could possibly assist her in such a dire situation. Jaehyun observed her carefully before stating, almost casually, that what she truly needed at that moment was money. The bluntness of his remark left her momentarily speechless. Regaining her sharpness, she retorted that they were not friends, and questioned whether he even possessed the kind of resources he was implying. She challenged him further, asking whether she appeared so vulnerable that he believed he could simply step in after his public clash with Kang Minju and assume control of her affairs. Jaehyun merely smiled, unfazed by her hostility. In a steady voice, he demonstrated an unsettling awareness of her dealings. He pointed out that the company she was negotiating with was Newell Corp. He added that the firm was attempting to secure a monopoly on the distribution of 10,000 tons of lithium. If Seo Young succeeded in closing that deal, she would gain leverage to collaborate with Chansub's microchip business. Such a chain of events would pave the way for immense profit and public recognition. As he laid out the details with precision, Seo Young could not ignore the implication that he knew far more about her circumstances than he should. And in that realization, the carefully constructed balance of power between them began to shift. Seo Young found herself unsettled by the way Jaehyun seemed to anticipate her thoughts. It confused her how he could possibly know what was on her mind before she voiced it. Watching her closely, Jaehyun calmly responded that he was simply thinking the same thing she was thinking. He explained, with measured confidence, that even a rumor that he was working with Chansub Investment would be beneficial. In their line of business, perception often carried more weight than truth, and the mere suggestion of such an alliance would elevate his standing. His composure only aggravated Seo Young further. She snapped at him to stop talking, her tone turning sharp and hostile. She reminded him that he had been locked up for years, cut off from the outside world. There was no plausible way he could have accumulated any real money during that time. Her words were meant to corner him, to strip away the confidence he was projecting. Instead of arguing, Jaehyun silently reached for his suitcase. With deliberate slowness, he flipped it open. Inside, it was packed tightly with bundles of cash. The sight stunned her into silence. For a brief moment, her anger dissolved into disbelief. The evidence lay directly before her eyes, undeniable and overwhelming. Jaehyun then revealed that while in prison, he had met someone influential. He explained that more money flowed through the underworld than she could ever imagine. The world she believed she understood so well had layers she had never truly seen. He spoke with quiet assurance, as if this new network of connections had already secured his comeback. Before she could recover, he handed her his business card. Announcing that he had another meeting, he instructed her to call him if she ever needed him. His tone suggested that he now held options, leverage, and freedom. Without waiting for her response, he turned and left. Seo Young remained frozen, the card resting in her hand. Her mind raced with the unsettling possibility that she might actually lose the deal to someone she once considered insignificant. The humiliation of that thought burned within her. Meanwhile, Jaehyun walked away with a faint smile, convinced that the balance of power had shifted. In his mind, it was finally her turn to feel cornered. Later, inside the office of J Investment, the tension resurfaced. Seo Young confronted Jaehyun directly, demanding to know why he had not terminated the contract with Newell Corp. Her voice carried both accusation and disbelief. Jaehyun replied evenly that Newell Corp had increased their deposit. He admitted that at the time, he had not possessed enough capital to match the offer. His explanation was calm, almost detached. Seo Young countered immediately, pointing out that the amount in question was $5 million. She implied that such a sum should not have been an obstacle for him. Jaehyun responded coolly that if she wished to continue the conversation, it should remain strictly about business. He made it clear that he was no longer interested in personal undertones. With a sharp edge in her voice, Seo Young declared that they were not friends. There was no reason to pretend otherwise. Jaehyun sighed, neither offended nor surprised, and pushed a document toward her. He instructed her to review the assignment carefully and sign it after reading the terms. Attempting to belittle him, Seo Young mocked his small company, remarking sarcastically that it was impressive for such a minor operation to draft a contract of this scale. She claimed she could easily rewrite it herself. However, as her eyes scanned the contents, her expression shifted. Shock replaced arrogance. Jaehyun noticed her reaction and asked what the problem was. Seo Young looked up at him in disbelief. She questioned whether he was serious. The contract stated that in exchange for $5 million, he would receive partial ownership of her company. Jaehyun replied without hesitation that it would not matter as long as she repaid the amount. $5 million was insignificant to her, or at least that was what she had implied earlier. His words were laced with subtle provocation. Seo Young scoffed, insisting that the money meant nothing to her. Still, suspicion clouded her thoughts. She questioned whether his funds were legitimate. The inquiry was not casual. It carried a direct accusation. Jaehyun appeared genuinely puzzled by her remark. Seo-young justified her suspicion by explaining that it was only natural to question sudden generosity from a man who had just been released from prison. She did not care that a random individual had stepped in to help her. It was strange, even unsettling, that someone with his recent past possessed such a large amount of cash. Jaehyun exhaled slowly, his patience thinning. He remarked that he could easily say the same about her. In that moment, the unspoken truths between them lingered in the air. Both of them had secrets. Both of them had risen through methods they preferred not to explain. And now, standing on opposite sides of a fragile deal, neither was willing to back down. He made it clear, in his own detached way, that whether she trusted him or not was of little consequence. Trust was sentimental currency, and he had no need for it. As long as she paid what she owed, that was all that mattered to him. Seo-young rose from her seat with restrained indignation simmering beneath her composed exterior. She declared that Jaehyun seemed to believe he was untouchable, as though he stood above consequence and accountability. Her voice carried a sharp warning. If the money they were dealing with turned out to be dirty, he would be the one held responsible. She left those words hanging in the air, heavy and deliberate, before turning away. Later, inside the company building, the atmosphere shifted. Hyeri approached Seo-young with a warm smile and expressed her gratitude. She said she was sincerely looking forward to working together and hoped their partnership would be fruitful. Seo-young responded politely, thanking and affirming that she, too, anticipated a successful collaboration. Their exchange was professional and cordial, masking the complicated web already tightening around them. After they parted ways, Hyeri wasted no time in contacting Jaehyun. She informed him that the deal had been successfully completed and asked whether he had received the 5 million. Jaehyun confirmed that he had just checked the transfer and praised her efficiency. His approval was measured, but unmistakable. Hyeri then mused aloud, almost playfully, about how Seo-young might react if she ever discovered that the 5 million she had borrowed had been redirected straight back to him. Jaehyun responded coolly that he suspected she would learn the truth sooner than expected. In his estimation, Seo-young had already signed a contract with Hyeri's shell corporation, unaware of its true nature. Once the money was funneled back to him, the cycle would quietly complete itself. From Jaehyun's perspective, Seo-young would ultimately be the only one at a loss. If she continued repeating this pattern, he believed she would gradually lose any chance of freeing herself. The lure of easy money would settle into her habits and reshape her judgment. In time, he was certain she would reach out to him again, of her own accord. Dependence, once cultivated, rarely dissolved on its own. That evening, Seo-young sat across from Jaehyun in a quiet restaurant, the low hum of conversation and glasses surrounding them. She admitted that she had managed to smooth over a few pressing issues thanks to him. With a hint of curiosity beneath her calm tone, she mentioned the underworld connections he seemed to possess and asked whether he could share more information about them. Jaehyun declined modestly, insisting that such matters were not easily discussed. Seo-young pressed further, unwilling to retreat so quickly. She wondered aloud whether his refusal was connected to something she had said during their previous encounter. With calculated charm, she reminded him that he knew she could be good company and even better as an ally. Jaehyun observed her quietly before conceding that he might be willing to reveal a thing or two, but only under one condition. If she shared a secret of her own, he would consider it collateral between them. The suggestion caused her to hesitate. He clarified that it would be nothing more than a small secret kept strictly between the two of them. Seo-young's lips curved into a knowing smile. She remarked that it sounded as though he wanted something from her after all, and she hinted that she could be far more agreeable than he assumed. Jaehyun then stated plainly that what he wanted was to do cardio training with her. The unexpected proposal caught her off guard. For a moment, she simply stared at him, stunned by the shift in tone. Then she leaned closer across the table, lowering her voice. She said she would prefer to have a serious conversation with him instead. She confronted him about his persistent tendency to cross boundaries, implying that his time in jail might have distorted his sense of limits and propriety. Jaehyun thought the price was fair, given the information he had. In truth, he could have offered that 5 million to anyone, and they would have gladly accepted, willing to engage in a wrestling match with him without hesitation. When Seo-young realized what he implied, she slapped him sharply across the face, furious that he had compared her to those reckless girls. She had been trying to show him kindness, particularly because she knew his parents were no longer alive, yet his careless words struck a nerve. At first, Jaehyun gazed at her with a flash of anger, but then, almost reluctantly, he calmed himself, smiled, and admitted that he was indeed a loser. He promised her a tip and suggested she look into JR. Their run was nearly over, he explained, though they would remain in the green until the end of the week. A week later, Seo-young found herself sitting alone in a restaurant, scrolling through her mobile phone with growing frustration. The stock Jaehyun had mentioned had peaked last week, but had since started to decline. She couldn't help but calculate in her mind how much money she could have earned if she had actually bought in. Her irritation deepened as she wondered how he always seemed to know these things before anyone else. Meanwhile, in his office, Jae-hyun had agreed to train her in cardio, and in return, she requested that he lend her an additional $3 million along with any investment insights he had. He agreed without hesitation, and they proceeded with their training session. The next day, Jae-hyun handed Seo-young's recorded session to Minju, who became immediately delighted. She commented on how Seo-young acted arrogant and mighty in front of everyone, yet sounded just like anyone else when caught off guard. This gave her the perfect opportunity to turn the tables and insult Seo-young herself. Jae-hyun had given Minju the file as a gift, and her excitement was palpable. She began plotting how to irritate Seo-young even further. Jae-hyun, noticing her enthusiasm, complimented Minju, telling her she looked cute when she was happy. Minju, flustered, shyly stopped him, insisting that he shouldn't call her cute. Then, curious and slightly suspicious, she asked why he had been acting so differently around her all of a sudden. Jae-hyun regarded her silently for a moment, then finally responded, telling her that it wasn't a question she should be asking a victim. Minju's voice trembled as she apologized sincerely, her eyes filled with regret. Jae-hyun, however, seemed unshaken, his expression calm but edged with frustration. He remarked that people often say, "Others never change," questioning why he would go to such lengths if all he wanted was a simple apology. Minju, determined, requested to do cardio training with him, her tone carrying a mix of urgency and reproach. She placed the blame squarely on his shoulders, insisting it was his fault for not listening to her. She reminded him of the promise he had once made, emphasizing that the matter was never about him engaging in a wrestling match with Seo-young, it was about her. She needed Seo-young to kneel before her, and she would not let him forget the commitment he had made. Jae-hyun nodded in agreement, silently acknowledging her insistence. Minju then inquired about his future plans. Rising to his feet, he replied sharply, his voice cutting through the air, asserting that she did not need to know. She should simply wait. As he turned to leave, Minju suddenly moved, wrapping her arms around him from behind in a firm embrace. She repeated her question about his plans, but he responded clearly, stating that he did not trust her with that information. Despite the tension, they moved past the moment, beginning their workout together, side by side, their shared effort blending determination with an underlying, unspoken conflict. The next day, So-young and Chan-sub were dining together at a restaurant, enjoying a casual meal. Suddenly, Seo-young's mobile phone buzzed with a notification. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she saw that Jae-hyun had been right, the rate had indeed increased. Chan-sub, noticing her shock, asked what she was looking at. Seo-young quickly reassured him that it was nothing. Maintaining her composure, she insisted, with a hint of playful generosity, that it was her treat and that he could order whatever he wanted. Chan-sub, curious, pressed if something had happened, noting that her behavior was unusual. She let out a small laugh, explaining that she had almost gone bankrupt but had somehow managed to navigate her way out of the trouble. She added, with a teasing tone, that she could afford to do this every night for him. The following day, at Jae-hyun's office, Seo-young entered with a determined stride. Without preamble, she aggressively placed her mobile phone on the table, her eyes blazing with accusation. Jae-hyun smiled faintly, acknowledging that he had seen the notification too. The rate had been delisted. Seo-young's voice trembled as she questioned whether he had known this would happen. Jae-hyun shook his head, insisting that he had no way of predicting it. Her frustration boiled over, and she shouted, demanding to know how he would fix the situation, insisting that she had lost all her money because of him. Jae-hyun, calm yet firm, questioned how this could possibly be his fault. Overwhelmed by the situation, Seo-young broke into tears, her voice cracking as she asked if he was playing with her, the weight of her emotions filling the office. Jae-hyun had offered her some advice earlier, and she had taken it to heart. He agreed with her decision and elaborated on the reasoning behind his suggestion, but ultimately, she chose to invest, and that was entirely her responsibility. Still, the tension between them lingered, and the unresolved score weighed heavily on both of them. He did not even consider the possibility that she might run away from the situation. As they interacted, he began playing a recording of her moans. The sound made her freeze in shock, and she instinctively rushed forward to slap him. He, however, caught her hand mid-air and stopped her with a casual remark, noting that he was curious to see how Chan-sub would react once he heard it. He reminded her of her obligation to repay the loan he had given her, $5 million initially, with an additional $3 million later, for a total of $8 million. The weight of the sum made her anxious, and suspicion crept in, leading her to wonder whether he had orchestrated this entire scenario from the start. Jae-hyun, noticing her unease, scoffed at the notion of any plan. To him, she was merely making excuses and nothing more. He warned her that if she failed to pay back the money, he would deduct 100 from the total every time they did a cardio session together. She sharpened her eyes and accused him of losing his mind. In response, Jae-hyun reminded her of her own words from the past when he had been lying on the floor and she had placed her foot on his face, declaring that if he brought her $100, she would spare him the punishment for the day. In the present, Jae-hyun reflected that the situation was now clear. She was neither able nor willing to repay him, and therefore, he no longer felt any obligation to be lenient. From this point onward, he would handle matters his own way. After all, she could not claim unfairness, given what she had put him through. Following this tense exchange, he continued the training session with her, their interactions a mix of discipline and unresolved tension. A few days later, they found themselves at a restaurant. Seo Young's outfit was revealing, and she felt increasingly uncomfortable under the weight of his gaze. While they sat together, Miss Han entered the restaurant, and Jae-hyun immediately greeted her warmly, asking her what had brought her there. Seo Young noticed the subtle change in her expression, betraying her discomfort. Jae-hyun offered Miss Han a seat, and as she settled in, he discreetly pressed a button on a device, causing Seo Young to flinch, leaving her unsure of what to do next. Miss Han had been observing Seo Young quietly when Jae-hyun mentioned, almost casually, that he had heard she reported every move of Chansub to Yoo Seo Young every week. Han's brow furrowed slightly. She hadn't expected a secretary to show such unwavering loyalty to her boss, and the thought made her flinch involuntarily. Jae-hyun's tone, calm yet probing, asked if Chansub was aware of her actions. Han hesitated, caught off guard, then inquired about his intentions. Jae-hyun's expression softened slightly, and he praised her for understanding quickly. She pressed further, wondering if he would relay this information to her boss. Jae-hyun reassured her that he would not have come this far, only to betray her trust. His curiosity, he explained, was of a different kind. He wanted to know whether Chansub would react violently over it, as he had in the past. He pondered whether Chansub had truly changed over time. Han, sensing he was skirting the point, prompted him to speak plainly. Jae-hyun finally delivered his proposition. She was to report directly to him instead of Seo Young, and in return, he would provide her with J investment. Seo Young, who happened to overhear, was stunned, questioning in her mind if Jae-hyun had lost his senses. Han, however, countered, insisting it was impossible to consider trusting him blindly, to which Jae-hyun calmly responded that she need not worry about trust at all. He could easily tell Chansub exactly what she had been doing, but she should forget about trust and simply hope that what he was offering was genuine. Jae-hyun's words hinted at something deeper, a situation she could hardly have imagined. Seeing Seo Young in this vulnerable position beside him, despite the tension, he made it clear he had no intention of blackmailing Han. Afterward, he initiated a regimen of cardio training with her, their interactions laced with an odd combination of discipline and subtle tension. That night, Jae-hyun sat alone in his home, staring at his board filled with various notes and images. He methodically crossed out Han's picture, reflecting that nothing had been resolved yet. This, he knew, was only the beginning. At that moment, Hyeri entered his room and called out to him. He granted her permission to enter, and she curiously asked what he had been doing. Her attention was soon drawn to a photograph of a woman, and she remarked on her beauty, elegance, and affluent appearance. Jae-hyun's gaze hardened slightly as he responded, revealing that the woman in the picture was Chansub's sister, the very person he needed to eliminate most painfully, next only to Chansub himself. His mind drifted back to their school days, to the gossip circulating that Jae-hyun had been beaten again, and the quiet shock at his apparent inaction. That was when he first met her. Amidst a crowd that had ignored him, she had approached, showing genuine concern for his well-being. While no one else had tried to reach out, she had carefully applied a bandage to his wound, and he had felt a surge of gratitude he hadn't expected. The girl had introduced herself simply as Kim Si-hyung. That brief encounter, small yet significant, had left a lasting impression on him, a moment of kindness in an otherwise indifferent world. After a brief silence, she inquired about his name. Jae-hyun introduced himself politely, and she responded with a warm smile, complimenting the sound of his name. She then mentioned that she had to leave, but hinted that he could stay for a little while longer. Jae-hyun agreed without hesitation. Before leaving, she offered him a piece of advice that seemed simple but carried weight. He should not let himself be beaten, and, if necessary, strike back. He could not allow anyone to underestimate him. Hearing her words, Jae-hyun felt a wave of confusion. Over the following days, he noticed that Si-hyang began spending more time with him. Somehow, her presence seemed to shield him from the relentless bullying he had endured. These moments with her became the brightest and happiest during his high school years, days filled with laughter and a rare sense of belonging. But happiness, as it often does, was fleeting. One day, Jae-hyun was forced to confront a truth he had never wished to discover. Inside the boys' restroom, he found himself being beaten again. Chan-sub, standing nearby, took a casual puff of his cigarette and commented on Jae-hyun's recent cheerful demeanor. He asked how Jae-hyun had grown so close to her sister. The question struck Jae-hyun like a cold gust of wind. He denied any inappropriate connection, insisting he had done nothing of the sort. Chan-sub smirked, revealing a truth Jae-hyun was not prepared for. Si-hyung was his sister. He explained that she had encouraged Jae-hyun to befriend him, to spend time together under false pretenses. The revelation hit Jae-hyun like a punch to the chest. He screamed and cried, calling it a lie, unable to process the betrayal. Slowly, the pieces fell into place, and he realized that every kind word, every gesture of closeness he had cherished had been an act. Chan-sub smiled at Jae-hyun's tears, relishing the torment he had caused. He asked, almost mockingly, whether Jae-hyun had truly believed Si-hyung was interested in him. The cruel truth settled. His little sister did not even know where he lived. Jae-hyun's mind spun with disbelief. All of it had been an act, a carefully constructed illusion. He could not accept it without seeing for himself. Determined, he entered Si-hyung's classroom the next day, posing as a first-year student. When they confirmed it, he felt a bitter mix of anger and relief. He now knew Chan-sub had lied, but Si-hyung herself remained completely unaware of the deception. With tears streaming down his face, Jae-hyun approached her, his voice trembling. He asked if it was true if Chan-sub had indeed lied. Si-hyung sighed softly, her expression gentle, yet filled with sorrow. She admitted that it seemed Chan-sub had told Jae-hyun everything, leaving him to grapple with the painful truth of betrayal, confusion, and heartbreak. Jae-hyun was caught completely off guard. She had looked at him with such intensity that he felt a chill run down his spine. She told him, in no uncertain terms, that he disgusted her and that he should never come near her again. The words reverberated in his mind long after she had walked away. As he stood there, processing the encounter, Jae-hyun reflected on the memory. Now that he thought about it calmly, he realized that perhaps he had only imagined her sadness, reading too much into a fleeting expression. It had to be nothing more than his own mind playing tricks on him. His reverie was abruptly broken when Hyeri called his name, snapping him out of his thoughts. She observed that he seemed lost in his memories and gently advised him to stop dwelling on the painful moments of his past. Hyeri reminded him, with a hint of pride, that she had completed everything he had asked of her. She believed that this was the moment she would be rewarded for her diligent efforts, a recognition of all the hard work she had put in. After that, both of them engaged in an intense cardio training session. Once they finished, Hyeri reminded Jae-hyun that Uncle Byung-goo's sentence was almost complete. Jae-hyun was surprised at how quickly time had passed and felt a wave of gratitude toward her. He patted her head affectionately, showing his appreciation for her timely reminder, knowing that without it, he might have ended up scolding her. He quickly changed into his shirt and instructed Hyeri to organize all the emails from Ha-yura on the cloud and send him a copy. Hyeri agreed obediently, but also inquired about his unusual decision to go out so late. Jae-hyun responded matter-of-factly that he had a task, someone he referred to dismissively as a bitch needed constant training. Hyeri, intrigued and amused, felt a spark of happiness at this, and eagerly asked if she could see the puppy he had. Later that night, at a modest motel rather than a hotel, Seo-young's irritation was evident. She could not fathom why Jae-hyun had summoned her there at such an inconvenient hour. Jae-hyun, however, smiled wryly, noting that he found the choice of setting strangely appropriate given the circumstances. He questioned whether she was simply foolish or whether her memory was truly that unreliable. Maybe she failed to grasp the situation she was in. She genuinely wished to see herself on the 9 o'clock news the following day. Seo-young was taken aback by his sharp words and demanded clarification about his intentions. Jae-hyun did not hesitate. He told her to remove her clothes. Without protest, they then proceeded to engage in a rigorous cardio training session together, the intensity of the workout mirrored by the tension in the air between them. The next morning, at the Chan-sub office, Chan-sub was seething with anger when he noticed the photograph of Seo-young. His frustration boiled over, and he immediately summoned Jae-hyun, unleashing a stream of insults upon him. The atmosphere in the office was tense when Ha arrived, casually leaning against the doorway with a cigarette in hand, commenting that Chan-sub looked terrible. Jae-hyun, concerned by the palpable tension, cautiously asked if something had happened. Chan-sub, still fuming, gestured for him to sit down, warning that the story was a long one. At that moment, he instructed Secretary Ha to hand over something. He complied silently, placing a neatly sealed envelope in front of Jae-hyun. As Jae-hyun carefully opened it, he saw the photograph of Seo-young. The sight immediately conveyed the gravity of the situation. Chan-sub leaned back, his voice tinged with both frustration and desperation, and asked Jae-hyun for a favor, one that had weighed heavily on him. He explained that despite trying countless approaches, he had yet to make any progress. He needed Jaehyun to understand that he was actively searching for the individual responsible, someone who had once received his messages with ease, but had now begun sending photographs instead. The person clearly believed they could elude Chansub's reach with impunity. Chansub's fury made it clear that he was determined to prove otherwise. Jaehyun remained silent for a moment, processing the intensity of Chansub's emotions, and then cautiously asked what exactly Chansub wanted him to do. Chansub admitted that he regretted having to place such a burden on Jaehyun, but he felt that conventional methods would not suffice. He needed someone with connections in unconventional circles, someone who could locate people using means that were off the record. Jaehyun paused to think, the pieces falling into place. He considered the possibility that Chansub was essentially looking for a broker, a figure with access to networks that ordinary methods could not reach. He also noticed that the face of the man in all the photographs had been deliberately obscured, perhaps indicating someone close to Chansub. Chansub's confusion was evident as he heard Jaehyun's speculation, interpreting it as a suggestion that Jaehyun might know this mysterious person. Jaehyun quickly clarified that he was not claiming to know the individual personally, but rather, he might be missing a subtle clue, something that had been overlooked. The tension in the room lingered, the conversation heavy with unspoken implications, as both men contemplated the dangerous path ahead. Chansub was sitting quietly when Jaehyun brought up a name, wondering aloud if it might be Shin Hyunjin. At the mention of the name, Chansub couldn't help but laugh, commenting that this person lacked any real guts. Jaehyun nodded in agreement, though Chansub added that it wouldn't hurt to double-check, acknowledging that there might be some merit in caution. Taking Chansub's advice seriously, Jaehyun pulled out his phone and showed him a video. In it, Hyunjin was exiting the hospital, making a disturbing remark, wishing that Chansub would die. Chansub's expression shifted to one of confusion as he watched the footage, unable to fully process what he was seeing. Jaehyun explained how he had come across it by chance. On the day of Hyunjin's release, he had overheard the conversation and instinctively recorded it. In the video, Hyunjin could be seen speaking ill of Chansub to others, even going so far as to announce a wrestling match against Seoyoung, deliberately in front of Chansub. Jaehyun assured him not to overthink the situation, noting that everything had simply aligned by coincidence. He believed it was important for Chansub to be aware of Hyunjin's intentions, even if Hyunjin himself lacked the courage to act on them. Chansub allowed a small smile to creep across his face. He agreed with Jaehyun, but admitted that confronting the situation might also be a way to blow off some steam. Jaehyun replied cautiously, suggesting that if Chansub truly insisted, there was always the chance that Hyunjin might actually go through with something. The scene was silent, except for the quiet presence of Secretary Ha, who observed everything without interrupting. Meanwhile, Hyunjin had returned to the hospital when his phone rang. The caller was Jaehyun, who explained a plan that immediately drew Hyunjin's skepticism. He scoffed at the idea, accusing Jaehyun of losing his mind. Jaehyun calmly reminded him that Chansub was his friend and was actively searching for him, hinting that something significant might be about to happen. Hyunjin could not understand the reasoning behind it, yet Jaehyun's warning was unmistakable. He should avoid crossing paths with Chansub at all costs. The words left Hyunjin visibly shaken, a wave of fear washing over him. Jaehyun continued, admitting that he wasn't sure anyone could hide from Chansub if it came to that, and suggested Hyunjin prepare himself just in case. After delivering the warning, Jaehyun ended the call, reflecting silently on the depth of his friendship with Chansub. He wondered if their bond was strong enough to risk life and safety for each other, much like he and Minsu had done in the past. At the same time, on the university campus, Minju spotted Minyoung and called out to her. "Long time no see," she said, her voice carrying across the quad. She remarked on how university life must be treating Minyoung, but the surprise was mutual. Minyoung hardly recognized her old friend at first. Flustered, she quickly told her companion that she needed to meet Minju, and her friend nodded in understanding before they parted ways. Minju stepped closer to Minyoung, her expression a mix of curiosity and subtle accusation. She asked why Minyoung had sent her friend away, hinting that perhaps she felt embarrassed to be seen with her. Minyoung, however, shook her head and smiled warmly, assuring Minju that nothing of the sort had happened and that she was genuinely happy to see her. Encouraging her to follow, Minju led the way, and Minyoung, slightly puzzled, inquired about their destination. Minju's eyes glimmered as she asked if Minyoung remembered Jaehyun. He had been released from prison recently, and Minju wanted to personally deliver something to him as a gift, a gesture she had been contemplating. Meanwhile, Jaehyun was walking through the quiet streets when his phone rang. It was Minju calling. He answered casually, asking if she was busy. He suggested that they could talk later unless the matter was urgent. But Minju's voice was insistent, laced with urgency, as she reminded him that he remembered Minyoung. Jaehyun acknowledged this, calmly adding that she didn't expect an apology from Minyoung either. Minju hesitated for a moment before admitting that she had looked for Minyoung, wondering if she even wanted to see her. Jae-yoon asked if Minju had found Minyoung on her own. She clarified that it wasn't an intentional effort for anyone's sake. She had simply run into Minyoung by chance. Jae-yoon, slightly surprised, thanked her for her effort, which caught Minju off guard. She quickly insisted that her actions were not done for him. He mentioned that he would come over around 7 o'clock and ended the call abruptly. Minju's frustration surged as she realized he had hung up without further explanation, leaving her even more unsettled because she hadn't even had time to clean her place. As Jae-hyun neared his residence, he suddenly spotted So-young standing nearby. Anger flared within him, and without hesitation, he shoved her to the ground. His voice was sharp and filled with accusation as he demanded why she had come. So-young tried to maintain composure, explaining that she had only come to greet him politely, but Jae-yoon's temper boiled over. He grabbed her by the throat, his voice raw with fury, questioning why she would come without checking first if he was home or even alive. So-young denied any ill intent, her hands raised in defense. Jae-hyun's eyes burned with frustration as he shouted that, regardless of her reasons, she should never have come uninvited. He told her firmly that she should have waited for him to come to her, rather than intruding into his space and disrupting his day. Thorath loosened his grip on her for a brief moment, his eyes cold and unyielding. He told her to remain silent and wait for him, emphasizing in a chilling tone that if she wished to survive, she would have to endure living every day in terror, never knowing when her end might come. With that, he turned and left, leaving behind an oppressive silence that pressed down on her chest. Meanwhile, Minju sat in her room, her irritation growing by the minute. It was already past 7, and Jae-hyun had yet to arrive. Her mind raced with worry, imagining that something might have happened to him. Turning to Minyoung, she tried to distract herself, commenting that the room smelled strange. Minyoung frowned slightly, insisting that she did not notice anything unusual. Minju, her patience thinning, demanded a clear answer, yes or no. Minyoung finally responded that she did not smell anything. Just then, Jae-hyun arrived, his presence filling the doorway. Minju immediately voiced her frustration, asking what had kept him so long. Jae-hyun explained tersely that he had been occupied with something important. Minju, sensing unease in his expression, pressed further, questioning if something had gone wrong, as he looked unusually tense. Jae-hyun's gaze then shifted to Minyoung. "Long time no see," he said, his voice calm but edged with a strange intensity. Minyoung returned the greeting cautiously, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Before Minju could speak again, Jae-hyun moved suddenly, grabbing Minyoung and demonstrating his strength in an almost absurd display of cardio exercises right before her eyes. The act, bizarre and unsettling, seemed intended to intimidate more than impress. After he finished, Jae-hyun asked Minyoung if she had enjoyed the show. His words carried an undertone of threat, reminding her of the bullying she had endured. She nodded reluctantly, recalling the painful memories of being tormented by Chansub and the others. Jae-hyun's sharp eyes reflected his memory of her suffering, a grim acknowledgement of the past. Minju, unwilling to let the tension go unchallenged, accused Minyoung of deliberately avoiding them. Minyoung protested, insisting that it had all been a misunderstanding. Minju's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "Misunderstanding was nothing," she said, as if daring Minyoung to excuse inaction. She demanded that Minyoung speak up if she disliked their behavior, refusing to tolerate silence. The irritation in Minju's voice bordered on fury. Minyoung admitted, almost whispering, that after that fateful day she had been terrified. She had feared that someone might die, and that fear had haunted her since. Minju's response was immediate and unforgiving. She shouted at Minyoung to be quiet, dismissing the notion that anyone had actually been killed. Her words were biting, questioning whether Minyoung fancied herself some innocent princess. Seo-young, watching from the side, laughed softly, commenting that it was understandable to be scared, and that fear did not make her foolish. Suddenly, Chansub stepped closer to Minyoung, his smile cruel and menacing. His voice was low and mocking as he suggested that if she truly felt fear and guilt, perhaps an apology was in order. The next moment, without warning, he struck her hard in the gut, forcing her to the floor. His words came swiftly, demanding that she rise and apologize in person, threatening her life as if it were a mere bargaining chip. Minyoung, trembling and overwhelmed, apologized, acknowledging that she had not thought things through. Her voice shook as she begged for forgiveness, her words sincere but laden with fear. Chansub, seemingly amused by her submission, placed a hand lightly on her head and remarked that he had been bored lately. The casual cruelty in his tone underscored the terrifying power he wielded over her, leaving a lingering sense of dread in the room. From that moment on, Minyoung became Jaehyun's devoted servant. She had approached him, trembling with guilt and shame, unable to find the courage to speak at first. Every step toward him felt heavy with the weight of her past mistakes. She whispered apologies, her voice breaking as she admitted how sorry she was for everything she had done. She knew full well that her actions could not be forgiven so easily, yet she had tried, with all her heart, to make amends. Tears streamed down her face as she begged for forgiveness, aware that it was long overdue, yet hoping against hope that he might show her mercy. Life had become a torment for her ever since the incident. Each day had been an unbearable hell of regret and longing. Jaehyun crouched down to meet her eyes and, in a voice calm yet firm, told her that he forgave her. The words struck Minyoung with disbelief and relief.